handing over the space to Professor Panshikar now. Thank you.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm so glad that I'm here today to talk to you about a topic that's extremely close to my heart, that is special education, and more so looking at the space for children with learning disabilities. Now, I'm really thankful to the team of Firki and Teach for India and Ekta for giving me an opportunity to reach out to you. Because as an in-service teacher educator, I do get an opportunity to interact with a very small group of teachers in the making. However, I feel it is very important to connect with people outside that classroom and be able to reach out and communicate and try to dispel the myths that surround the field of special education and even how to reach out to children with learning disabilities. So in the attempt to do this, I'm going to be taking you through understanding exceptionalities, understanding a little, very briefly, about special education, and then try to get into understanding of learning disabilities. So I'm going to be sharing my PPT with you and we'll go through it together. Okay, so as we proceed through the evening, these are the little things that I'm going to be touching upon. We will look at what it means to be an exceptional learner and what are the various categories of exceptionalities. We'll understand special education, look at learning disability, again, what it means, what are the characteristics of individuals who have learning disabilities, and if there is any typology, any kind of a classification, that gives us a better understanding of the same. Always the questions are about what are the learning disabilities, so we'll just try to touch upon that. Then we will look at what are the various myths and facts about learning disability, how one can go about identifying a child with learning disability, and then how does the diagnosis come about. And lastly, we will look at what are certain classroom implications when there is a child with learning disability. Now, when we talk of exceptionality, the very first thing that comes to my mind is that exceptionality has to do with diversity. When we look at diversities, there are n number of diversities in human beings. We are different with regard to the way we look, our height, our weight, our skin color, our hair, the dialects that we talk, the languages that we talk. We are so different. And because each one is different, we can say that each one of us is exceptional. However, given the fact that we all are very different, we are yet very similar. Yet this similarity stops at a particular point and we realize that a person is different. So in the field of special education, or when it comes to the educational domain, we start looking at those children, those individuals who may be different to an extent that it affects their ability to learn like all other children in class. And thus, when I start looking at what could these exceptionalities be, the dimensions could be vis-a-vis whether they're able to see clearly, whether their hearing capacities are fine, whether they're able to move the way everyone else is able to move. Are they able to perceive situations or even stimuli around them like most others? Is their speech, communication any different? How are they with regard to their social skills, their emotional health, and yes, very importantly, even their intelligence? Thus, how do I define an exceptional learner? Because as I said, the exceptionalities are too many. They are varied. But an exceptional learner is considered one whose intellectual, behavioral, communication, physical, or multiple characteristics are such that she or he is considered to need a placement in a special education program. In any classroom, we will see that there are children who are very different. If I go back to when the days when I was a school student, I remember there was someone who was so intelligent, they would be getting the first grade or the second grade throughout. Uh, there were some who would constantly be down there with regard to the academic scores. And most of us were average, getting around 60, 70, 80, 85% of marks. And no one knew who is really exceptional there. However, teachers always felt that there were some who required a little more help. Probably when I look at those children today or those of my peers today, I wonder whether they had certain exceptional needs. Maybe the exceptionalities also.
Professor Apoorva, I think we've just lost her. Just give us a few minutes before she logs back in. Thank you.
Cerebral palsy. And when we consider what these characteristics are and what may be their needs, one finds that they are not able to benefit in the mainstream classroom.
Professor Apoorva, sorry to interrupt you. We lost you for about a few seconds
Okay,
in between. So maybe just a point earlier, if you could restart from that. Thank you.
okay. So we are looking at all those characteristics of individuals who we cannot reach out to them in a mainstream classroom or an inclusive classroom as it is called today. And then it warrants that these children, so that they benefit from instruction, they require or they need special education services. Now, one thing we need to remember that when we talk about exceptionality, it is not only a child with disability who is considered exceptional, but on the other hand, a child who is very intelligent, is gifted, talented, also requires special education interventions. Because again, this child is not benefiting from the way a classroom instruction happens. And why does that happen? That happens because most of our classrooms are so structured that we attempt to reach out to the maximum number of students. And this maximum number is generally the average student. It is not a student who has high intelligence, high need for creativity, who's gifted, talented, and neither is it a child who lacks certain capacities and thus requires some intervention. And so we are looking at a wide range of these exceptionalities. Just now, on this particular webinar, we are going to be focusing only on disabilities and only on specific learning disability as a condition. So when I look at the categories of exceptionalities, we can categorize them into these five. One, the exceptionalities can be based on cognitive capacities or sensory capacities or speech language capacities, emotional and behavioral capacities, or lastly, physical and motor capacities. Now, when I'm talking about these cognitive capacities, this has to do with how individuals are able to utilize their cognitive skills and cognitive processes. And when we see that there is a deficit in the cognitive processes, it leads to a condition called intellectual disability, or if there are certain splintered processes which are affected, it can lead to a specific learning disability. Or, as we were talking about earlier, those who have very high cognitive capacities would be the gifted and the talented. When it comes to the sensory based exceptionalities, we look at visual impairment, which includes total blindness as well as those having low vision. We also look at children who have or individuals having hearing impairment. Hearing impairment also those having complete deafness and those who are hard of hearing. And lastly, as a dual sensory impairment, it is deaf blindness. These individuals cannot hear, they cannot see, and it leads to multiple disabilities as well. The third category has to do with speech language disorders. As I was mentioning earlier, individuals, those who have difficulties like stuttering, stammering, nasality of voice, or very high pitched voice, these are the ones who require speech therapy interventions. And there may be some with aphasia who have difficulty even accessing language to understand and to communicate with the others. The fourth group that we can look at are the ones who may have mental illnesses. It may be those with childhood schizophrenia, it can be psychosis, it can be OCDs, it can be phobias. So mental illnesses where the interventions are more so coming from the psychiatric domain. Then we have children with conduct disorders who may be extremely aggressive, who may be engaging in self-injurious behaviors. They may be inflicting pain on the others. They may engage in destruction of property. They may have attention deficits. And there may also be children who are on the autism spectrum, who have specific difficulties in communication, social interactions, having very repetitive or rather very restricted interests, and may show certain repetitive behaviors. And the fifth category that we can look at are the ones having certain physical and motor challenges. So this includes individuals with cerebral palsy, with muscular dystrophy, where we see a gradual degeneration of certain muscles in the body, leading to difficulties in accessing education. They may be children with spina bifida, where the spinal cord is not completely developed, and thus they may experience difficulties in locomotion or even control of bladder and bowel movements, depending upon where the spine has not been developed completely. And then there are also individuals who are amputees, maybe those who are victims of accidents. And because they're not able to move around in the society or access, again, physical infrastructure for the schools, they lack in education. So these can be considered to be the very, very broad categories of exceptionalities. And because of some of the reasons we are not able to reach out to them as teachers, all these require special education. Special education thus is instruction that is specially designed to meet the unique needs of children and youth who are exceptional. And when I say exceptional, again, I repeat that we are looking at those who have certain specific needs because of their capacities and capabilities, and somehow in a mainstream classroom, the teachers are unable to reach out to them. Special education can be provided in special schools, or it can be provided even in resource rooms in inclusive setups. But either ways, there is a need to have at least some part of instruction which is tailor-made only and only for these individuals. One such group of individuals who require special education services are those having learning disabilities. Now, I think as Indians, our first encounter with learning disability was with the film Tare Zameen Par. With his brilliant acting, Amir Khan and little Ishan were able to touch our hearts, and we became aware about what learning disability is. And over the years, we find that this learning disability, or the terms which are used with this particular condition, are numerous, and we hear about them in our day-to-day lives. So when I talk about learning disability, the other terms which I also hear are specific learning disability, specific learning disorders, dyslexia. There is a slight difference between these terms. However, for a common man or for even a teacher in a mainstream school, they nearly communicate the same thing. As a professional, however, in the field, I would say that learning disability and specific learning disability are extremely closely linked. Learning disability is a much wider term, whereas specific learning disability pertains to difficulties in specific areas of learning. Specific learning disorders are extremely broad. These can refer to those individuals who have difficulty in learning for various reasons. It could be because of intellectual disability, it could be because of a specific learning disability, it could be because of a language impairment. So it's a very, very broad term. Dyslexia is a specific kind of a learning disability. However, the term dyslexia has become rather redundant with the new classification that came about in 2013. So I'm not going to be using the term dyslexia, though many may be more familiar with the term dyslexia than learning disability. So what does learning disability mean? To be able to understand learning disability, we need to understand how learning happens, because it is a disability about or with the process of learning. Now, if you can just look at the diagram that is being shown to you. For learning to happen, there is a need for input of any kind from the environment. This input, be it visual in nature, be it auditory in nature, be it kinesthetic in nature, it can take any form. This enters our sensory memory, which is a part of naturally our brain. It is in our central nervous system. It gets registered there. When I start focusing on that particular aspect of my memory, I pay attention to it. It enters my short-term memory. I go through that experience. I rehearse that experience. I pay more attention to it. I perceive that experience here. And when I start processing, what was it about? What did I see? What did I hear? What sense does it make? That information then moves to my long-term memory. It remains in my long-term memory till the time I'm required to use that information. So when someone asks me, what did you see, or what was the color that was shown to you, immediately I recollect, I access that particular memory from my long term, and I give an answer, which is my output, and I say, oh, it was yellow color. Or I say, oh, it was a cat. So to be able to give this output, maybe verbally, maybe through pointing out to what I saw, or through writing, I require all these key processes to be working. So I require adequate sensory memory, I require attention, I require the ability to rehearse, have good memory, and to be able to retrieve. Learning is a rather complicated process. It is complex, and what may happen is somewhere or the other, there can be a breakdown. The breakdown may happen at the level of your memory. It can be your attention. It can be your perception. It can be how you rehearse the information or how you access the information, how you use the words that you know, how you use the images that you know. And when there is a breakdown somewhere, it can manifest as a learning disability. So now when I start looking at learning disability, I can say that it's a cognitive processing based disability. It does not have anything to do with whether I can see clearly, whether I can hear clearly, whether I'm able to touch something. No, it is about whether I'm able to make sense of any of these sensory experiences that I have. It is to do with how I'm able to process this information, make the connections, see the linkages, see how things are different. And only then I'm able to reproduce. So all these, if at all, some of these are deficit, it can lead to a learning disability. So it is a cognitive processing based disability. What we need to understand is that specific learning disability or learning disability, it is a heterogeneous group of disorders. What does this imply? It implies that not every individual with a learning disability is going to have the same problems or the same issues or the breakdowns in the same processes. So some child may have problems in understanding language. Another may have an issue in expressing oneself in writing. The third may have an issue in understanding language and also doing math. The next may have an issue in thinking at a deeper level. And thus, individuals with learning disabilities are a very diverse group. It's very difficult to find two individuals with learning disabilities who are the same. And this many times makes it very difficult to diagnose learning disability. When we again talk of this heterogeneity, we find that different areas are affected. It can be language learning and how to use this language. It is acquisition of the reading skills. It is acquisition of the writing skills. It is the ability to do math. It is also to do with thinking. Now, of course, when we say that we are learning, learning is not restricted only to these very apparently cognitive and academic areas. These also have to do with learning how to regulate one's behavior. It has to do with understanding how people around you behave and how you are expected to perceive their behavior, understand what they mean when they shrug their shoulders or when they turn their eyes somewhere or when they look somewhere else when you're talking. What does it mean? These social skills also need to be learned. This is not something that we are born with. And so learning disability can affect academic areas as well as non-academic areas, social interaction. And that's where many social interaction difficulties come about. What we find is that along with problems in all these areas, learning disabilities may be found with other disabling conditions as well. So I may have a child with visual impairment along with a specific learning disability. I may have a child with mental retardation or intellectual disability along with learning disability. I may have a child with emotional behavioral issues along with specific learning disability. However, what is important to remember is that none of these conditions are leading to a specific learning disability. What I mean is that because I have a visual impairment, it does not make me learning disabled. It can create problems for me in learning. However, visual impairment is a sensory problem. It's a sensory disability. Whereas a specific learning disability is a cognitively based issue. So I can see these comorbidities. I can find two conditions existing together. It's also important to remember that specific learning disability is not caused by if you feel that, oh, I have not been a good parent and so my child is showing learning disability. No, that's not the case. So it's not because of poor parenting. It's not because you're not spending quality time with your child. It's not because the child does not go to the A-level school. Or it's not because we talk in our mother tongue at home and the child goes to an English medium school. It has got nothing to do with this. Neither does it have anything to do with your social economic standing. Absolutely nothing. So learning disabilities is an inherent condition. It can be found in children across socio-economic strata, different cultures, different religions, different backgrounds. So we need to be very sure what specific learning disability is and what specific learning disability is not. What are the signs of specific learning disability? How do I start identifying or how do I start looking at what should I look out for, which gives me an inkling that there may be a learning disability in this child. There are a number of areas which are areas of challenges. But as a parent or as a teacher, this is what I can be a little aware of. Is the child showing difficulty in speaking? If that's the case, I may start thinking, wondering whether it is specific learning disability. If there are issues in reading, I may start thinking whether it is a specific learning disability. Clumsiness, difficulty with motor skills, fine motor skills, using your pencil, being able to cut with a pair of scissors, difficulty coloring within a boundary, difficulty writing on a straight line when the child is doing copywriting. Even this can be some of the indicators. When we talk about writing difficulty, it is not only the handwriting that I'm referring to, but it is also about being able to put down the ideas that you have in your mind on paper. I cannot think, I don't know what to write. I wonder whether this is what I should write. When children complain of these things constantly, when we start wondering whether it is a specific learning disability. Issues in paying attention can be an indication of SLD. Problems in doing math, computations, reasoning with mathematical problems, even being able to learn the tables, these are indicators. Difficulty in listening and understanding what is being said. Again, I'm not talking about hearing, I'm talking about listening. So it is not the sensory ability, but making sense of what is heard. The child may have difficulties in thinking, so problem solving is a problem. Being able to make connections, reasoning is an issue, understanding cause effect relationships is a problem. So thinking issues may be another indicator. There may be some children who have good reading skills, writing skills, but they show poor social skills. They do not have friends, they are loners. They want to be friends, but they don't know how to interact, or they can't keep friends. This may also be an indication of specific learning disability. Difficulty remembering, difficulty rehearsing, difficulty producing information when demanded, memory issues. Again, just an indicator of specific learning disability. Comprehending what is read, comprehending what is being told, making sense of what is being communicated, comprehension issues. So some or the other of these problems that you see are indicators of specific learning disabilities. Can I say whether all of them have to be present? I cannot. Because as I've said earlier, specific learning disabilities are very heterogeneous. So you may find issues with the child with any of these areas. So any combination may be present in a child. It's just that one has to be vigilant, one has to be a little alert and start looking at and identifying these. So when I get to look at all these difficulties, I can categorize these difficulties under three main headings. So a child or an individual with specific learning disabilities may show cognitive problems, may show social emotional problems, and may also show academic discrepancies. Cognitive problems are characterized by short attention, issues in perception, motor coordination, memory, problem solving, and metacognition. Metacognition is the ability to monitor, regulate one's own thinking. Children with specific learning disabilities have difficulties in this metacognition. It is knowing about your thinking, knowing about your cognition. And because you're not able to regulate, monitor, evaluate, judge their own thinking processes, their learning gets worse. They may also show academic discrepancies in basic reading skills, reading comprehensions, math calculation, reasoning, written expression, oral expression, listening comprehension. Now, when I say academic discrepancy, what discrepancy is this? This discrepancy is with regard to what is expected of the child with a particular level of intellectual functioning. So if I'm expecting a child with an IQ of 120, which is above average, to read fluently, to understand what is being read rather well, to be able to understand even math very well. But somehow I find that, this child is not reading at the level that a child with an IQ of 120 should be reading. Then that discrepancy would give an indication of specific learning disability. Similarly, we also have to be looking at what is appropriate for a particular grade level. So if I'm looking at a child with an IQ of 120 in grade 3, I expect certain level of performance. Or if I'm looking at a child with an IQ of 120 in grade 8, I'm expecting a particular level of performance in academics. And if I find a discrepancy there, then there may be specific learning disability. Another domain from where problems arise, or we can see, at the social emotional area. We may find a child with learning disability having hyperactivity because of repeated experiences of failure or not meeting the expectations of the teachers, of the school, of the parents. Many children with learning disabilities have poor self-concepts. They may also show learned helplessness, just a refusal to do anything because they feel whatever I do, how much of an effort I put in, I just don't tend to excel. I don't reach to the mark. So why bother? They may show social imperfections, so difficulty relating to people, feeling socially awkward, not wanting to mix up with their peers. They may show signs of distractibility, poor motivation. So we can find that specific learning disabilities manifest and have major issues or challenges with regard to the cognitive processing, social emotional processing, and achievement of certain academic targets. When I was talking about the academic discrepancy, this is what I was referring to. If you can see here, the blue line that has been drawn on the graph is the expectation of a child with an IQ of 100, which is very, very average IQ. So with an IQ of 100, the expectation is that be it vocabulary, be it comprehension, be it mathematical calculation, math reasoning, spellings, short-term memory or long-term memory, the child's performance or achievement has to be close to that blue line. However, as you can see this particular profile of a child with specific learning disability, the child is showing very poor performance on vocabulary or below average performance on math calculation or spellings, similarly short-term memory. So we see that the profile of learning, profile of achievement is very different than what is expected. So a child performing here performs at the level of maybe on vocabulary like a child with an IQ of 85 is performing. Whereas when it comes to comprehension, the comprehension is far better. So this uneven pattern of achievement is an indication of learning disability. However, I should warn you that just looking at a profile like this, one cannot say that it is specific learning disability. One has to wait for a very, very thorough assessment and diagnosis to happen. When we looked at the heterogeneity of the problems that one encounters, one wonders whether all specific learning disabilities are the same. And of course, the answer is no. According to the Diagnostic and the Statistical Manual, the 5th edition, which helps us in coming up with a diagnosis, the DSM-5 has identified these 3 types of specific learning disabilities. So according to the diagnostic criteria, a child may have a specific learning disability with impairment in reading or They may be a specific learning disability with impairment in written expression, or they may be a specific learning disability with impairment in mathematics. What characterizes specific learning disability with impairment in reading? This is characterized by difficulty with word reading, that is, how correctly the child reads individual words. Are they read correctly? Or does the child misreading certain letters in the word? Or does the child add any sounds when the reading is happening? Does the child omit any sounds? Does the child substitute sounds? This can lead to a lot of time a difficulty in reading fluently. So a child may show a poor reading rate. So a child will read with lots of gaps, may show letter by letter reading, or may try to read the word again and again to make sense of it. So the reading is disfluent. Or it can be characterized by difficulty in comprehending what is being read. So I am not able to remember because I'm not able to understand who is the speaker, what is being said, when did a particular event happen, why did a particular event happen, what could be the reasons of that particular situation to have occurred. So the comprehension is not only about the very, very basic and the literal information that is available, but it becomes very severe because you're not able to see connections across texts or make connections about what they know with the text that they're reading. And this manifests then as a specific learning disability with impairment in reading. Now, when I'm looking at the terminologies that we've used earlier, the word dyslexia was used earlier to refer to this specific learning disability. So when there is a specific learning impairment in reading, it is dyslexia. Dyslexia, it is difficulties with words, difficulties in reading. Again, I need to reiterate that a specific learning disability with impairment in reading need not manifest with all these three. Some children may have difficulty in accurate reading, some may have difficulty with fluent reading, some may have difficulty only with comprehension, or some may show a combination of all the three. Thus, again, a heterogeneity with reading impairment. The second typology is specific learning disability with impairment in written expression. So we are not talking so much about handwriting here. We are looking at how the child is able to pen down what one thinks, what one ideates, what one wants to communicate to the others. Now, in the process of writing what they think and feel, they may lack the clarity or organization of what they're thinking. So they may repeat ideas, or they may just put down ideas without a continuity. So like, for example, if they have to write about my favorite person, you expect the writing to happen along certain lines. You talk about the person, what the person does, what are the things that appeal to you, why do they appeal to you. Maybe this is a kind of a flow that you expect. However, a child who has difficulties in organization of thought may write why he or she likes the person, then go about talking about who the person is, and then we talk about certain things which are completely tangential. And so when a third person is reading that particular written text, they're not able to make sense of it. Or when they have written something, you may find that the written work is full of spelling errors. They are not able to spell words correctly. Or at times, a particular word may be spelled in different ways in the same written text. So they may write the word cat, as CAT, which is correct. Some other place they may write it as ACT. At some other point in the written work, they may write it as TAC. At some other point, it may become a CTA. So they're using the correct letters. However, the letter sequence is not correct, and thus spelling errors may occur. Written expression issues are not only characterized by spelling errors or disorganized thought. Many a time, the grammar, the syntax, the sentence structure that they use may be incorrect. They may write the way they talk. And because they write the way they talk, it is not acceptable because written language is different from spoken language, and thus the fluency of their writing gets affected. They may also have difficulties with punctuations. They may not use their full stops and the commas and the question marks or the apostrophes correctly. And because there is a difficulty or a deficit in the use of these punctuation marks, naturally what they write may not make sense to the other person. So these kinds of difficulties or a combination of these is manifested as a specific LD in written expression. This condition was earlier called dysgraphia, difficulty with writing and written work. The third is specific learning disability with impairment in mathematics. This particular condition earlier was called dyscalculia, difficulty with calculations and difficulty with numbers. A child with this particular specific learning disability may have a poor number sense. They may have difficulties understanding whether a 5 is greater or smaller than any other number value. They may have difficulty understanding the relationship of certain computational terms with what to do. So when I say add, they may not know that they have to put the two sets of things together or two numbers together and then count beyond or compute beyond. They may have difficulties in the memorization of arithmetic facts. Mental math becomes a problem for them. They may have difficulty in calculation, which over a period of time, children start doing maybe a 2 plus 3 is equal to 5 very easily. But these children may yet require to count a 2 and 3 on their fingers, or they may require to have representation like drawing circles and cancelling them as they count. And because of this, their fluency, the rate at which they're able to engage in mathematical computations gets affected. They may also have difficulty in reasoning with mathematical terms. When I say divide or when I say proportion of, when I say you have to take away, when I say how much remains, how many remain, how can you possibly distribute equally. When I'm using these terms, they have specific connotations in math. However, a child with a specific learning disability in mathematics may have difficulty understanding. They may have difficulty even following the algorithms of solving mathematical problems. They may not be able to access the correct tools. And because of this, naturally the answers are going to be incorrect and it may reflect that the child does not understand math at all. So they require very, very different kinds of supports. So a child with specific learning disability in reading or written expression or math need not have these three disabilities completely separately, because learning is so interlinked that a child with a specific learning disability in reading may also show difficulties with math, or difficulty in the acquisition of reading skills may also impact spelling skills. So again, it is a very, very complex kind of a situation. However, the diagnostic criteria are very clear. We need to be looking at what are the major problems, and accordingly, the typology can be looked at, the classification of learning disability can be looked at. so many issues, what could be the cause of these issues? What we have found is that learning disability has to do with the dysfunction of the brain. We have already said before that learning disability is a cognitively based disability. It has to do with the dysfunction or the difficulties in thinking, in processing information. And this happens because many a time learning disability runs in families. As a practitioner, when I take the case histories of so many children, I find that maybe the mother has had an issue in studies, or the father had a problem, or they may be a paternal uncle, or they may be a maternal uncle, or they may be someone in the family who has had difficulties with schooling. And when I'm saying schooling because that seems to be a benchmark, for learning. So they have these school dropouts, or they always had difficulties in learning. So when we look at that history, we find that learning disability is hereditary. But many a time we find that there is no family history of learning disability, then it could be because of a genetic mutation. There is ample of research which shows that there are genes on specific chromosomes which are responsible for developing issues in learning. So there are genetic issues. But again, we don't know that there's so many causes. Some that have been identified that there are problems during pregnancy or during birth. It can be exposure to X-rays. It can be malnutrition of the mother during pregnancy. At birth, if the child has low birth weight, or the child is premature, or it has been a very prolonged labor, there is low oxygen that is available to the child at birth, this can lead to learning disability. So in either of these cases, there is some implication for a damage to the brain. It is not anything else. It is a dysfunction of the brain which is leading to learning issues. Is it restricted only to a pregnancy and birth? No. We also find that in the early developmental period, which can be maybe the initial few months from birth, or 1 or 2, up to age 2 years, 3 years, poor nutrition, illnesses like maybe meningitis, it can be accidents, it can be falls, and thus trauma to the brain. This can also lead to learning disabilities. So basically, they can be a hereditary factor, they can be a genetic basis, or it can be a trauma to the very, very fragile, delicate, developing brain. Any of this can lead to a learning disability. Does a trauma to the brain always lead to learning disability? No. There would be cases when there is no impact. The child may be absolutely fine. But yes, we have found that many children, or rather there is a history of difficulties during pregnancy, birth, and right after birth, which are implicated in learning disabilities. But what is for sure is that poor parenting, your language, the community that you come from, your religious background, the school that the child goes to, these are not leading to learning disabilities. Neither is a visual impairment, hearing impairment, emotional trauma, a sensory disability, or a locomotor disability going to lead to learning disability. So the primary causes are hereditary, genetic, and trauma to the developing brain. Is it enough to just look at the causes of learning disability? No. It is important also to look at some of the facts. Because when I interact with people, be it at the in-service level or the pre-service level, or when I am even interacting with people in the community, I find that many people think that this is what learning disability is, or this is what is learning disability all about. So let us look at what are some of the myths that or misconceptions that we have encountered, and what are the facts against it. Learning disability was considered to be not very common. What we tend to see generally is probably a person with visual impairment, a person who has difficulty in locomotion. One would say, oh, there is learning disability does not exist. Because learning disability, in a way, is a hidden disability. There are no physical signs of learning disability. However, what we know is there are nearly 7 to 10% of individuals in the population who have learning disability. So the prevalence is rather high. So if I'm looking at a class of 60 students or a class of 50 students, I should be expecting to have at least 4 or 5 children with a learning disability in my class. Some may have milder disability, some may have a more severe condition, but learning disability will be there. So it is rather common. Another misconception and myth is that learning disability is seen only in children. Well, no. Learning disability is found in adults also. Because it's a condition that you're born with, or you have acquired it just right after your birth. And so it is going to remain with you. There is no cure for learning disability. Learning disability can only be managed. Special education, remedial services, supports from different sources are what are going to help a person go through and manage their learning disability. So it is not outgrown, it cannot be cured. It was always thought that learning disabilities are found in boys, but no, it is. We also find learning disabilities in girls. However, yes, the proportion of learning disability is far higher in boys. Nearly, it's 4 times, we can say. Similarly, it also happens that boys come to notice because they may engage in more disruptive behaviors in the class because they're unable to learn, and they may be noticed by the teacher, they may get a referral for assessment, and a diagnosis comes about. However, with girls, they may be quieter, or we don't expect a girl to behave in certain manners, or there is an expectation that, okay, she's not learning too much, she's not achieving certain things, it's okay, she's a girl. And so there may be a lower diagnosis of learning disability in girls. But uh, there is enough evidence to show that it is more common in boys. Learning disabilities can be diagnosed in any age. It can be diagnosed in a child, it can be diagnosed in a teenager, it can be diagnosed in adults as well. Or this is my experience that many a times when I go out for awareness building programs, sensitization programs with adults, at least one or two come back to me and say that now that you've told us so much about learning disability, I wonder whether I have one. And I'm sure that if I sit down with a formal assessment, there may be a learning disability that I can diagnose with this person. Learning disability in childhood is easier to diagnose because we are looking at very, very structured or demanding situations in a school. And because there is a very formal, structured environment, we are able to see, or we are able to find whether the child is different as compared to the others. We start diagnosing or looking for a diagnosis generally after the age of 8 years. Why after the age of 8 years? Because prior to that, a child is yet acquiring the very, very basic skills and competencies which are essential for learning. Generally, by the time the child enters grade 3, most of these skills have been acquired and the child becomes proficient in learning. So we start looking at a thorough diagnosis or clinical diagnosis to happen after that. But even in adults, we can diagnose learning disability. There is a misconception that those with LD cannot learn. Not the case. They can learn, but they require specific strategies. And we will be looking at some of them a little later. We have seen earlier that it affects not only academics, but all aspects of life. It is social skills, it is emotional being, it is emotional well-being, it is even acquiring some of your skills like art, craft, dance, music. Even this can be affected because of learning disability.
Professor Apoorva, sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to give you a heads up that I'm getting a lot of questions.
Yeah.
So if we can finish probably 5 minutes earlier, and some of
Okay.
the content can be addressed in the Q&A. Thank you.
Okay, sure. We have already looked at many of the signs of specific learning disabilities, and these precisely are the red flags for children who are very young. So when I'm looking at a child probably in the junior KG, senior KG, grade 1, grade 2, I would be looking at some of these as red flags. Difficulty in talking, using language, understanding rhyming words, poor memory, difficulty following directions, children who have difficulty telling time, who have difficulty even learning the basic letters of the alphabet, uh, or even learning the days of the week, understanding shapes, colors. If you find that the child is showing these problems, which are much more than children of the same age, one should start looking at this child for whether the child requires more help. These can be referred for a diagnosis. And a diagnosis takes place not by just one person, it is a team effort. So we require a pediatrician, a neurologist, a psychologist, an occupational therapist, a special educator. All these conduct their assessments in their own way, which are all leading to a profile which develops, which tells me that this is learning disability. All these, for the purpose of certification, happen in government hospitals. A diagnosis can be done at any place where you have a team of members to say that it is learning disability. But if you want that the child who has a diagnosis of learning disability be able to avail of certain provisions, then a certification has to be done. A certificate of disability that is issued, which is done only by the government hospitals. So generally, what is the procedure like? A letter of referral comes from the school principal. Then you seek an appointment with the LD clinic in the specific government hospitals. Then a clinical and a neurological examination happens. Once there are markers, which is adequate indication that there seems to be an issue with the brain functioning, IQ assessment is done to rule out intellectual disability. Because only when there is no intellectual disability, we start looking at specific learning disability as a diagnosis to come about. After that, a thorough education assessment is done by special education professionals. And then all the data is collaborated and a diagnosis and certification is done. Is it enough to just come up with a diagnosis and a certificate? Of course not. This is a means to help a child with learning disability. Now, these are some of the pointers that I can suggest for classroom teachers who may have a child with a certificate of learning disability, or you wonder, or you feel that the child may have a specific learning disability and requires support. So what should you be doing? You can seat the child close to you, because the child may benefit from a little more personalized instruction than having this child sitting at the back of the room, because the child does not pay attention. Seat the child away from the doors and windows or any distractions. Pairing this child with another child who seems to be more focused or is a better learner helps, because we always know that children are able to understand children better. Even as a child, I remember I would trust my peer more than going to the teacher and saying I don't understand certain things. So peer tutoring, peer support works a lot. When you provide instructions, one has to be brief, short, provide step-by-step instructions. Because if the instructions are, too many instructions are provided, multiple instructions are given, a child is going to have difficulty in comprehending them and thus is going to feel lost. Provide extra time for reading and writing as compared to the other children. When you give written assignments, you underline the keywords. Or when you're giving oral instructions, emphasize the keywords. For oral responses or written responses, you can provide a sentence starter. Say, like for example, you want the child to give an answer to certain questions that are being asked, maybe in social studies. So you may want every child to say, I think the answer is. And when the child is doing this, when the child is saying, I think the answer is, The child gets time to recollect one's thoughts, organize one's thoughts, and then reproduce the answer. This helps many a time. One needs to provide for activity-based learning opportunities. Since children with learning disabilities may have issues in visual processing or auditory processing of information, they benefit through activities because they're kinesthetic and tactile. And so providing multisensory inputs or multiple means of input is what is going to help. This is what I can do in a classroom. However, as a special education professional, the child may require specialized interventions in the resource room. And here, activities for building a phonemic awareness are going to help the child. Phonic instruction, that is understanding what are the sounds made by the letters or letter combinations, will help the child learn to read and spell. Since children with LD may show issues in language vocabulary, you need to provide an enriched vocabulary and language development program. Teaching the child how to write, how to position oneself, how to hold a writing utensil, how to move that particular writing utensil to create patterns. This helps reduce the stress of writing. And of course, if children have difficulty, major difficulties in handwriting, you need to be looking at using computers for input. Or you can be looking at a speech-to-text format to help the child produce what the child wants to say. Specific instruction for developing ideation skills, understanding grammar, syntax, punctuation, that's going to help. Training in visual perceptual skills, auditory perceptual skills, which is understanding, say, maybe looking at differences, being able to see similar patterns, being able to understand what are the connections from across different patterns, that may help. Since metacognitive strategies may be deficit, processing or helping the child in executive functioning skills, how to pay attention, how to sift information, how to study, how to organize information, how to make notes. All this helps through the training in study skills. All these are very, very specialized instructions. Change does not happen overnight. It is a rather long-term process. However, change does happen. What is most crucial, however, I would say that as a parent, as a teacher, or as any individual in the community, is to accept the child for being different. It's okay to be different. Accept that you have problems. Accept that with the problems you're working hard. Accept that you are not lazy. Acceptance makes a lot of difference to children. You need to encourage children because we know that they show learned helplessness. We know that they show low self-esteem. We know that they are low on motivation. So it becomes imperative that all of us accept the child, encourage the child, motivate the child, just make the child know that we are here to support you in your whole endeavor, to support you in the struggles that we know that you go through in your attempt to learn. I think acceptance makes a lot of difference. I think that these two links would be very crucial because the questions that were sent earlier were to do with what provisions are available for children with learning disabilities in the CBSE board. Or one reference or one link is for that, and the other link is the LD Online, which is a very authentic and a very beautiful resource for you to understand learning disability, to help you understand all aspects of learning disability, interventions for learning disability, research about learning disability. And I think these should help you and take you on your journey to understanding learning disability better. I think I'm ready for questions since Ekta said that there were many questions that were coming in, and I think we need to be looking at that now.
Thank you, Professor Apoorva. Yeah, I think all of us definitely have a lot more questions, and I think it's a good thing because we're trying to channelize our thoughts towards understanding it better. So the first question that Ela has is that how do you actually start building inclusive education programs? Because you have to start somewhere, and there's a lot of things that you shared in terms of what can be done with peers and school staff and other things. So how do you actually start building it? What is the foundation of it?
See, to be able to look at inclusive education, it becomes very important that there is acceptance of the disabling condition uh, at all levels. We have found that sensitization activities in the classroom for the peers, for the classroom teachers, for the administrators, for the principals is very crucial, because unless and until you have that open mind, one cannot go ahead. Through these sensitization activities, awareness building happens, and there is more willingness to change. What can I do in a classroom? Is yes, I can start looking at differentiating instruction for a child. I would want to go back to again, as I said, there's certain things I would do in a classroom, and there's certain things which are going to be essential to be done in a resource room. Now, it depends upon which model of inclusion you would want to follow, or which is the model of inclusion the school is following. So, if there is a resource room, it can be a pull-out program where there are additional supports in a resource room. But if you want to be looking at complete collaboration, then it can be through the use of differentiated instruction, wherein a teacher will attempt to differentiate what is being taught along the lines of the content of teaching. It is the process of teaching. It will be what you're expecting the children to do at the end of the learning experience, and also the learning environment. So differentiated instruction is what works. So you plan different goals for different children. You look at creating the content which is going to be beneficial for different children. You look at representing the information in different ways. So some can be through pictures, some can be through specific just keywords, some can be through handouts, some can be through actions, some can be through paid activities. You can also give the child a facility to express oneself the way he or she wants. It need not be oral at all times. It can be through drawing a picture. It can be through just filling the blank. It can be taking off. It can be choosing certain options. It can be through group work. It can be paid work. So there are loads of options. It's one may start looking at doing little things, and which gradually will start building the inclusive learning environments.
Sure. Thank you. It's also like this follows up with the another thought that I just had was like also kids who are different, as you mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
there's a tendency of them being bullied in the classroom, and that becomes part of your inclusive classroom. Do you actually, what do you do for other kids also to understand that, certain kid might need help or it's a different kind of instruction? Because
Right.
it becomes obvious in a classroom with other students as well.
Yes, yes. When we look at situations like these, rather we have found that peers are very, very accepting of their peers with disabilities. However, the sensitization needs to happen as early as possible. Uh, there are activities that can be undertaken by the teachers, or if there is a counselor in the school, he or she can undertake these activities to help them understand through simulation what a child with special needs goes through. Uh, Here in Mumbai, we have the Xavier's Resource Center at St. Xavier's College. They work most of our children with visual impairment, and they have these sensitization activities across schools, and they also have a forum where they invite people to come and experience what it is like to be visually impaired. So even activities like these, you blindfold yourself and see how much you can experience the environment. How much do you understand? Of a learning disability, the activity that I take many a time is I ask the person to use the non-dominant hand, and I give a set of instructions very fast. They say copy it down, and when they're trying to do it, I also try to discourage them that how slow are you, look at your handwriting, it is so pathetic. And then they start experiencing that, oh, when I'm unable to do something, this is what I feel. And then when there is that little emotional connect that, oh, this is a feeling that a person who has difficulties is going through, they become more open to understanding the difficulties, what their peers are going through. So I think a lot of these little sensitization activities are going to help. Similarly, when we are looking at paired activities, very conscious pairing can be done that, okay, I have a learning disability, so I'm paired with a child who's non-learning disabled, but I'm good with art. So I am given the responsibility to teach the other child how to create patterns, how to draw, how to choose certain color combinations. With this, the other child also learns that I am good at something. I may have difficulty reading, but I'm good with art, or I'm good with music, I'm good with something else. So there has to be a very conscious effort to create opportunities for the child to showcase what the child can do. And I think these are activities which only a teacher can do in a class.
Sure, no, that's very helpful actually. There's another question that Preeta has that is there any particular reason for the comorbidity of learning disabilities with other disabilities, occurrence of them, and the pattern that we see usually?
Okay. Well, what we have found is that the comorbidity for learning disability is very high with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. It is not a high occurring condition with other disabilities. The reason I spoke about the comorbidity is that they can be a coexistence. However, a visual impairment does not lead to a learning disability, or a hearing impairment does not lead to a learning disability. This misconception had to be addressed, because many teachers or many professionals say, oh, visual impaired hai, to ye problem hone hi wala hai, right? So, however, the comorbidity, like nearly 40% of the children with learning disabilities have ADHD. And it is because, again, we are looking at the similar centers of the brain, which are essential for learning to happen, which also have a bearing on your ability to very consciously regulate your attention or regulate your behaviors for learning to occur. So thus we have a high comorbidity with ADHD, but not so much with the other sensory or locomotor conditions.
Thank you, Professor. There's another question which says that you shared a pattern, that a certain pattern if you see among kids, and you can sort of take them through to a diagnostic testing.
Yes.
I mean, what are the proper ways? Like, how long do you need to see that pattern in children? What is the duration of it? And does it also need to exist in all areas, as you mentioned, in reading, writing, and other areas?
Mm-hmm.
For one teacher to take that decision that let's take the child for a diagnostic assessment.
Okay. Uh, as I mentioned earlier, as a professional, I would wait for a child to come to at least grade 3. Prior to that, I may be getting indications that the child has issues. Because as I've said in the previous grades, when I'm looking at the pre-primary section of grade 1, grade 2, the child is yet acquiring language, or I would say structured language. The child is yet getting used to a very formal way of teaching and learning to happen, or expected very formal ways of reproducing what one has learned. One should be waiting for at least a year before the child is 8 to say that, oh, there may be issues that need to be addressed, and through an assessment of learning disability. But as a child goes ahead, we may find that after grade 4, when the curricular demands increase tremendously, when the child is expected to learn on one's own, or even the quantum of work increases, the depth of processing of information increases, all of a sudden there is a dip in the performance. So up to grade 3 or grade 4, the child was an above average student, was getting around 80, 85, 90% of marks. But all of a sudden, coming to grade 5, the percentage drops. We see the child is struggling, but the child is not able to perform at that level. So when you see that sudden dip in the performance when they're moving from that one very critical stage of schooling to the other, yes, you should be worried. You should be sending the child for a diagnostic assessment.
And I think this is where somebody also asked another question, that there are children who showcase some sort of learning gap for a very long period of time. And there might be different factors or environmental and others. So maybe, as you mentioned, like you need to look at it a little more deeply for one to actually go through that process of diagnosis then.
Yes, yes. Today we are looking at a very important model, as to when a child should be sent for a diagnostic assessment. We see that if you find children who are performing below average, below par, or showing consistent patterns of difficulties, you need to provide very structured intervention for at least 6 to 8 months. So the remedial interventions that I mentioned, they need to be provided maybe in a small group or even in a one-to-one situation, and you track the progress. And you find that when there is a one-to-one or very structured approach to teaching reading, spellings, written work, the child shows a difference. But when it is just a group tutorial, the child is not showing a difference. That's when it gives you better indication that yes, it may be learning disability, and a diagnosis then is essential so that the child can avail of certain accommodations to be able to then start functioning at par with the peers. So
Sure.
you require structured intervention first.
Sure, makes sense. Piyush has another question, which is different from the ones that we've been discussing as of now. Is that
Mm-hmm.
is in early stages, especially early childhood brain is
Mm-hmm.
developing and collecting experiences and going through other developmental milestones.
Yes.
Does concept of learning different learning styles apply to them, or learning styles can be mapped to individual after age 8 and diagnosis of any LD? So when it comes to the idea of learning styles, what is the relation between that and LD?
Well, there is no relation between learning style and learning disability. Each one of us has a unique learning style. And even if I look at children with learning disability, each one of them would have a specific learning preference. Now, the learning preference for a child with learning disability is going to be coming from which is the modality or which is the system which is weaker for them. So, like for example, a child who has difficulties in processing information which is visual in nature, also has difficulties in discrimination, visual figure ground. This child
Professor Apoorva, your voice is breaking a little
is
for us.
going.
Hi.
Yes, I will repeat. I will repeat
Sure.
what I
Thank
said.
you. Thank you.
Yeah. So a child who has difficulties in visual information, thus has difficulties in discriminating visual information, or has difficulties in deciphering what is the uh, figure on a background, or has difficulties in spatial relations. This child is going to start relying on auditory modality to gain as much as information as possible to overcome the visual processing problems. So the learning preference for this child would be a visual preference, would be an auditory preference. But because you have an auditory preference, that does not mean that you have a learning disability. So learning styles or learning preferences and learning disabilities have no connection. These are completely two independent concepts.
Sure. Thank you. Piyush, also, if you are still here, if you have further questions related to this specifically, we'll share Professor Purva's email ID as well. Saloni, yes, I'll be taking your questions as well. There's one more question which talks about, Dipali has this question, that a child who received learning disability certificate and
Mhm.
is eligible for privileges like a reader, writer, and extra time. Now,
Mhm.
should a teacher and parent focus on improving his or her reading skills, or should they focus more on improving attention span, retention, and recall? Because anyway, they are getting a reader and special privileges for that section where the child is struggling with. So, what should be the strategy in a certain
Okay.
sense?
I would say that this one is, it completely depends on what is the age of the child. Because even if there is a certificate, we would want the child to acquire the reading skills to a level that the child can start functioning independently. Because these provisions are going to be available only during schooling or when they're doing university education. But beyond that, what? So if we are looking at making the child independent in reading, we yet need to be focusing on reading skills till they are able to read sight words, or they are able to read to the level that they can function relatively independently. But of course, the focus has to shift from pure reading to acquisition of study skills, acquisition of skills which would make them better learners. So I would say one is it depends on what is the age. If it is a very young child, grade 3, grade 4, you can yet go ahead with intervention in reading, intervention in spelling. But if the child is, say, grade 8, 9, 10, or even older, they can be less time focused on acquisition of reading words to moving to comprehension, to moving to thinking, moving to organizational skills. The focus has to change.
Sure. Do you think, Professor, it's always better to talk to a special educator before one takes this sort of a decision, especially when it comes to this?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Because one has to be looking at what the needs are and how the needs change. Because the need of a child with learning disability in grade 5 is going to be very different than the need of that individual when he or she is probably in grade 11 or grade 12 or even as an adult.
Sure. Thank you.
So one
Saloni,
has to take that very, very balanced.
sorry. Yeah. Sorry to interrupt you. Yeah.
No, no, it has to be a very balanced call.
Right. A balanced thought. Right. Sure. Saloni has another question that teachers who are not certified in special education, are there any kind of tests that they can run in the school just for them to identify a pattern which can then take them further to a diagnostic assessment?
Yes, as teachers, there are many, many checklists which are available even online, and they would give you an indication about whether there could be a learning disability. So classroom teachers can use screening tools, as they are called, and many of these tools are available online. And later, if you want, I can share some resources to be able to, so that we can share with the participants. So they can use these screening tools, and if they find that they are meeting a particular criteria, then they can be referred to a clinical psychologist, to a special educator, or they can be sent for diagnosis.
Sure. Thank you so much. I think that with that we've come to an end to all of the other questions. I'll wait for a minute or two if anybody else has any other questions. In the meantime, we are sharing a
Mhm.
feedback form in the chat window. Please do take the time to tell us that if this webinar made, was useful for you and it helped you understand the topic a little better. Thank you. We're waiting for a few questions that you still may have, another 1 or 2 minutes. Thank you. Professor Apoorva, I hope
Yes.
that I know this has been a first webinar for you, and I know you were a
Yeah.
little apprehensive about the platform.
Yeah.
I mean, do share your experience about this platform. Like, I hope it was fruitful for you as well in terms of the questions that were coming in. And
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely.
sure, Chitali, yeah, we'll be sharing the link soon. Also, Sukriti, yeah, she's asking, are there any organizations that cater to LD, learning disability in school children? I'm sure there are lots of them, but maybe you can also share some resources, Professor.
There are many organizations. It depends on which city you are based in, uh, because there would be specific organizations there. So if Sukriti could tell us about where she's from, we may be able to share the resources.
Bangalore, she says.
In Bangalore, if you go to Cerebral Palsy Institute, they should be able to help you. Similarly, I think I will send a list of the organizations or resources, because often it's very difficult for me to think about or recollect the organizations which are outside. Okay.
Sure. And also, people are asking if they can contact you through email for further conversation.
Yes, absolutely. I would love to share my experiences.
Sure. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. And it's been really nice, and the engagement has been great. So I hope that we'll also share all the resources and the recorded webinar as well in a while. So thank you so much. Thank you, Professor, for taking the time to talk to us about it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a lovely evening, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, bye.